Welcome to Groom House Museum's podcast, At Home with the Picts, a crafted legacy. I am your host, storyteller Eileen Budd, and throughout this podcast I will be taking you on a journey with me around Scotland and beyond, exploring Groom House Museum's collection, speaking to contemporary craftspeople, artists and musicians whose work uses the same or similar techniques to the Picts. In this podcast, we will meet stone carvers, weavers and carnix players. We will speak to academics, archaeologists and blacksmiths, and together explore how the Picts lived and how they made their art. Because, as George Bain once said, theory may inform, but practice convinces. Landscape, Leathercraft and Trade episode. There is an old Scottish folk story about a young milkmaid who is terrible at milking cows. No matter how hard she tries, the cows will not stand still for her or give her any milk, and she is at her wit's end. Until one day, she meets a strange creature, half woman, half goat, a Glashtig, and the Glashtig offers the young lady a trade. In exchange for the Glashtig teaching the milkmaid how to always get the best from her cows, the milkmaid must give the Glashtig a bowl of cream and milk once a week. Well, the milkmaid agreed, of course, and the Glashtig teaches her a milking song, which lulls the cows and ensures they always stand and always give milk. And of course the milkmaid keeps her promise too, and there is harmony between our world and the fairy realm. Something we know for sure about the Picts is that as a people they lived together alongside other peoples, for example Romans, Scots, Gaels, and although their interactions with their neighbours could sometimes be defensive, aggressive or turn into battles, they could also be mutually beneficial and include trade. Trade was a part of the Picts' everyday lives, and so in this episode I went through to Glasgow to meet with Brian Terrell and Heather Christie, co-creators of the Carved in Stone Pictish role-playing game, which is being created in partnership with the University of Glasgow and the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. The game has been peer-reviewed by more ancient history academics and experts than you could shake a stick at, and it features an entire section devoted to Pictish trade. So let's meet Brian and Heather.
I'm Heather Christie. I go by Archaeoplays online. My general thing that I do at the moment is I make Minecraft videos on YouTube. I teach people archaeology through Minecraft. And somehow that caught the attention of the Society of Antiquaries, and they approached me to work on Carved in Stone, which is what we're talking about today. So for that project, I'm the lead researcher for the book. I'm responsible, or at least I'm the final person responsible for the information that's in the book, which is, as you might guess with the Picts, a big ask.
I'm Brian Tyrrell. I'm the writer and graphic designer and art director and general, face creative front of Carved in Stone. I run Stoutstoke Press, which is a small tabletop role-playing games publisher based in Edinburgh. I've been doing role-playing games for about 7-8 years now since I moved to Scotland. And I was approached by the Society about 5 years ago now with the general concept. They'd seen some of the books that I'd published. I'd worked with other existing publishers in Scotland before starting my own publishing house. And they went, "Oh, we think there's something in these games. We want people to access history in a way that's not just like boring archaeological research papers written for people with PhDs. Do you think you could make us like a 2-4 page little zine or something like that?" And I said, "Oh yeah, sure. Let's try out a proof of concept. Let's see how this works." And 5 years later, I now have a getting on maybe 200-page book.
Yeah, it's about 93,000 words at least, and it's only going to get bigger because we haven't added the glossary yet. So it's at the moment the book is longer than my PhD.
And that's condensed.
Cut so much.
I'm here today is to talk to you about trade and how you are using trade, or how trade is used in Carved in Stone, in the book and the game. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
You think about any kind of game that we play, board game or storytelling game or a video game, we think of the world through currency. You get experience points, you get bonus points, you get things to track, and
You
can
find gold.
You find all this treasure, and you can spend it, and you can get loot and cool things, and then you can get like honor points, and you can then cash it in to get boons from the king or whatever. And that's such a like currency, monetary, established trade value aspect that we're very familiar with today as a modern society that uses cash. But the Picts weren't that. They were a barter and a gift economy, we think. I feel like every statement about the Picts is always,
Yes.
we think.
Current theory suggests.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. There's no clear indication that they used anything like coins, because we just don't find them, basically. So yeah, it seems like, and the direction we've gone with that is that it is far more of a barter system, with various levels of or various different types of barter. So you can have sort of just transactional things of, I'm going to give you 5 bushels of wheat for a cow or something. I have no idea if that's a fair trade, but you can do something like that. Or if it becomes an item that has prestige attached to it because it used to belong to the king or some noble somewhere, or if it's something like silver, for example, then it gets more into, this is an economic exchange, but it's also a social exchange where there's reputation and clout being exchanged as well. But yes, there's no currency in Carved in Stone. We do get into hack silver a little bit, but we also, the other thing about the Picts, especially when it comes to something like trade and their trade goods, a lot of the research focuses on elite trade goods and things that wealthy people had. So when we talk about silver being really highly valued to the Picts, it was very highly valued among the Picts, but primarily among the nobility, because your average farmer what are they going to do with a whole lot of silver? If they're lucky, they maybe get a silver penannular brooch or something, but they're not sitting there on a hoard of hack silver and then going to market and trading their hack silver for a cow, So especially because silver in this period, it's not coming from Scotland. It's all imported and therefore all recycled multiple times over by this point. So it's not something that the average everyday person is going to have, which means that it's not something that our average everyday players can rely on to go and purchase what they need from a market. So we emphasize barter and talk about barter. There's a certain amount of also conveying etiquette of haggling, because before I was doing archaeology in Scotland, I did a certain amount of archaeology in Southeast Asia. So I've spent a certain amount of time in Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand, and in Indonesia, for example, there are markets where you haggle. And then there are situations where if you're going into a store, that's not a haggle situation. And I have witnessed a lot of foreign tourists try to haggle in a supermarket, and it's not something you can do, and it's really socially bad to do. And so there's an element in the book of explaining that, there are certain circumstances where haggling is acceptable. There are other circumstances where it's not going to be acceptable. And also haggling, there's a degree to which you can haggle and people are good-natured about it, and then there's a point where they start to get upset with you. And so reminding players and storytellers, whoever's telling the story, or maybe whoever's playing the person that's being haggled with, that they're allowed to, at a certain point, to say, you know what, this is not okay. It's not a fair deal, not doing it. So yes, there was a certain amount of having to. One of the things I've found in doing the research for this is having to kind of go back to the basics of anthropology and archaeology and convey things like what a barter economy really is to Brian and our writers, so that they can wrap their heads around it and then describe it to the readers. Because if the writers don't understand the system, then it doesn't matter if I'm telling them what the Picts did in a barter economy. If they don't understand what a barter economy really is, then they can't really write it.
Yeah. And then in terms of conveying this information, so much of it comes through, it's that sort of describe it as it is, not what it isn't, kind of form of using examples and tying it into other ways of living. So when we talk about barter and trade for the first time in the book, we're also tying it into your village. At first, you live in your village and everyone's sort of like doing their own thing, but also like working together. You have spare eggs, you give them to your neighbor, they make bannocks that feed the people who go out and forage for, food and berries and wild herbs, and they bring those back and they go into the stew, and everyone gets to eat stew. It's sort of trying to not make it feel what's the word, idyllic, but it is saying that like this is natural to you. This is the state that you live in as base. And then we talk about like hierarchies. You talk about the nobility and the court folk and the king, and then you talk about restricted goods, like only the nobility can ride horses, only the nobility can have hunting dogs. The nobility have access or more facilitated access to things like imported fabrics and dyes, and they use silver for big showy transactions, and you have to sort of layer and establish this information so it feels natural. It's not you're going to go into a barter economy and spend 3 barter points to barter really well. It's you need to talk and investigate and feel part of the community that you're in. And also, people are used to doing this. If you're traveling to a random village, you're adventurers, people are going to lend you things to, use. Oh, you need a hammer to go do a thing? Just go find someone as a hammer. Ask to borrow it for a bit, use it, then give it back. Like, it's a reframing how people can approach this as a story beat, and how they can rethink the way that they approach everything as a way from like a currency system into a social system. Then later, when we talk about trade goods, we have this huge... Still have to figure out how we're going to get it to fit it in the book. But we have this huge flowchart of things produced in Scotland and then things imported into Scotland, and where they meet in the middle of this flowchart of what is being made from them. So you might have like wood and lumber and semi-precious stones like garnets, and you've got cowhides, and you've got blubber, and you've got milk, and you've got like iron that might be mined out of the ground, and things that are precious because they're rare and you don't want to be selling them, things that are common that you want to be, really trading away. You've got lots of furs, you've got lots of wild animals in Scotland, so of course you're going to trade those away for pottery and for glass and for silver that are coming in from, the Byzantine Empire, from mainland Europe, that kind of stuff. And by that point that we're discussing about it from a sense of economy, it's not about I trade 4 lumber and get 1 glass. It's these are things that have value, but you also intrinsically know that it's every deal is its own deal. Whether it's a long-standing thing that you've got monks who might be delivering beer to a local sort of series of local villages in exchange for cowhides for their scriptorium, or it might be an individual like in the market, you haggle there and then, you get your thing and then you leave. It's all about the social and the different like weights and pressures within that system. It's not just one coin for another coin. We have an appendices to the book that's all of the long, complicated, nuanced, messy academic discussions that we still have to have, that are very, very necessary when talking about the past, but that would obfuscate and sort of get in the way of just enjoying the history in the main book. And one of those is just a huge... I think of it like a blog post about how to do roleplay and barter and gift economies without using currency at all. Because it's so fundamental to how so many games are played, is to think about it from a currency point of view. You spend your hit points, you have this as a penalty. It's how we quantify things. How can we take that away and instead make the barter and the gift part of the story in such a natural way? And there are no answers there, but lots of suggestions.
Yes. The other difficulty with trade with the Picts is that, and this is kind of across the various Scottish kingdoms at this time, is that we don't have clear evidence of anything they're exporting. But they're bringing in a certain amount of foreign goods. So it stands to reason that they are exporting things, we just don't know what it is. And chances are, because of that, that it's perishable goods. So it could be something like lumber, which doesn't survive well, could be something like food goods, or say cowhides or meat and such. We genuinely don't really know. So a certain amount of the trade system in Carved in Stone is kind of logical speculation based on what we know of the Picts, and going from there, and also knowing, about Scotland's natural resources. Lumber is a big one. So it's not necessarily that the Picts are clear-cutting forests or anything, but we do have a lot of lumber in Scotland. We certainly had a lot more in the Pictish period. So it's something that they could reasonably be exporting that wouldn't necessarily survive in the archaeological record, and therefore we wouldn't necessarily know is coming from them. In terms of things they're importing, this kind of goes a little bit back to why we chose to set the book in the book is set in 690 CE, and the reason we chose that is because we have a decent amount of information about King Bredi III in relation to other Pictish kings, aside from probably Nechtin III, who's Bredi's grandson, most likely. We don't really have huge amounts of information about other Pictish kings. So Bredi III made a lot of sense. He's responsible, or was involved in, certainly was the victor of the Battle of Nectansmere. We don't know exactly where the Battle of Nectansmere happened, but for those who may be unfamiliar, it's the battle where the Picts fought against Northumbria and won, and basically liberated southern Pictish lands from Northumbrian rule. And the way that Bredi did that was effectively luring King Egfrith of Northumbria into an ambush, and then Egfrith was killed. It's not clear if Bredi killed him or if somebody else killed him, but he was killed in battle, and that liberated the southern Picts. So there's a bit of discussion, certainly by the Venerable Bede, who is not a fan of King Bredi III, because Bede is Northumbrian, and he's not a fan of the Northumbrian loss at the Battle of Nectansmere. So there's discussion there, a decent amount of discussion about Bede relative to other Picts. We didn't want to set the book in the time of the Battle of Nectansmere. We wanted to not really focus on conflict in this book. As you've said, as we've said, a lot of storytelling around the past focuses on war and battles and things. And while those are all very interesting, there's quite a lot of material about battle and war, and we really wanted to break away from the stereotype of the Picts being these painted blue people running into battle and fighting the Romans. They certainly did fight the Romans. Whether they were painted blue is up for debate. But we wanted to show the everyday life of these people. And so, when it comes to trade, setting the book in the late 7th century was very helpful in terms of knowing who Bredi was, for example, or getting information about certain Pictish areas and what they were doing at the time. Especially because Bredi, he goes and fights a whole lot of things and quote unquote unifies Pictland, and there's a lot of combat that happens as a result. So we have information there. The problem is that late 7th century doesn't have much information for trade. There is, for anybody who's familiar with Ewan Campbell's work, there's an Atlantic trade system that's basically coming from the Mediterranean and North Africa and into Atlantic Britain and Ireland, basically. So what is now Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and then sort of northwestern England. And that is all happening. There's a lot of ceramics, a lot of glass coming in through there. That all finishes was sort of in the late 6th century to early 7th century. It's done by the time we get to the late 7th century. So we can't sit there and argue that there's goods coming in from that trade system for the Picts. The Picts are also aceramic. They didn't write much down. They didn't bury their dead with grave goods. They didn't build houses out of earth-fast materials. There's a whole lot of stuff that's just lost to time, and there have been so many new discoveries recently that every time I log into Blue Sky, I'm like, oh gosh, okay, I'm really excited to see whatever new Pictish thing has happened, but it also sends me into a little bit of panic. Yeah. Do we need to change the entire book?
I am terrified I'm terrified and elated they're going to find a written account from the Picts and they're going to be able to translate Pictish. Yeah. Because it will change everything. It will be so great, and I'll have to scrap like whole screeds of the book. What's really fun about the Picts on the point of aceramicism is to think about like Pictish and language, they were around written tradition cultures, basically surrounded on all sides, and they had Latin scribing monks in their communities, and yet for centuries they chose specifically to be what we think is an oral tradition society. They didn't write things down. They didn't write documents in the way that we write ledgers and documents and keep numbers today. They used systems that worked for them, and they clearly did work because they were a functioning kingdom that held their own against, loads of other people and also had international trade. So they chose that. And so you get sort of situations where they have imported pottery from the continent. They have like amphora of oil and wine coming in.
Yes.
They have access to ceramics and they're choosing not to use it, or they're choosing to use a form of it, but it's not widespread, or what's going on here. And that as like a question about what these people are doing and why they're doing it is so tasty and fun.
Yes.
It's why setting a book 5 years after a major, huge social change, huge war, huge reformation of a kingdom is so exciting, because you have the trade going on. You have Fife and Kirkin, the sort of the southern Pictland below the Month. You have basically ruined territory that's been 5 years ago sieged and attacked by Northumbria, and now it's recovering, and now you have all of these new fledgling villages coming back and people returning to homes that were pillaged and being. Now you have industry, now you have all these things happening, and those are really fun because those people are going to need to reconnect routes and reform roads and rebuild bridges, and how are they going to do all of this? And that creates fun stories.
Yes.
Yeah, puzzles.
Yes.
I'm just going to stop this just in case it
Sure, yeah.
goes off again.
Yes, the Picts are such a beautiful example of so many things that we try to teach in anthropology and archaeology. And for me, one of the things that I was very interested in very early on was what's academically called intercultural interaction. So basically, when one group of people meets another group of people, what happens in between? And for a long time in anthropology and archaeology, there have been a lot of theories of, well, that one group meets another, and then whichever group has the better technology just basically subsumes the other group and teaches them all of the good technology, and then that other group just kind of disappears and or adopts that technology because it's clearly better. And there's so many problems with that line of thinking. And the Picts are a beautiful example of a group that's like, yes, no, we understand that writing exists. We use it on occasion. We don't feel the need to use it more. Yes, we understand that ceramics exist. We use them for our molds, for our brooches, but we don't necessarily feel the need to make cups out of them. Why? And I love that because it really clearly argues against these really outdated theories that are kind of rooted in a number of things, but a lot of the time they started with, say, Roman expansion and assuming that everywhere the Romans went, the local populations took the Roman ideas and ran with them because clearly the Romans were superior, which is not a thing that Romanists believe today. And it shouldn't, it's been difficult to kind of toss off that mantle of bias and such in the archaeological record. But yes, and the other thing, so in terms of trade with the Picts, going back to trade with the Picts, the other thing, Brian mentioned glass. We do have glass coming into Pictland in this period, at least as far as we can tell. The many systems of glass trade are also not necessarily there anymore. But where the Picts are getting their glass, they're getting it from the Germanic tradition. So this is, for anybody who wants the technical term, it's Group B glasses from Ewan Campbell's types and such, and Evison, I believe. It's a lot of. We get claw beakers, which are my favourite thing in terms of glass vessels. Imagine a drinking glass, but in the bottom half of it, it's got little tentacles or little claws coming out of it that then the bottom bit ends up lining up with the glass itself. And it's got like 10 of these around the glass. They're the weirdest object, and they're in these weird colours. They're in like a brown or like a dark blue or sometimes a dark green. Sometimes they're a little lighter, but a lot of them are kind of what we will call natural glass colours. So they'll be in these kind of browns or pale yellows, pale blues and such. But the other thing we see with Group B glass is a deep blue colour to the glass, which we see coming into Pictland, but we don't necessarily see super spectacularly represented by their neighbours in terms of glass vessels. So it gets into this really interesting question. But the other thing about international trade, as we sort of talked about with silver, and it applies to glass as well, is that these materials are not being made in Scotland. They're not being found or smelted in Scotland. So when you get them, they get recycled and recycled and recycled and recycled. And so the vast majority of glass in Pictland by this point is almost certainly recycled glass that's been recycled from broken vessels and cullet that's maybe come in. There may be glass that was first brought into Pictland in the Iron Age that's since been recycled and recycled and recycled with a whole bunch of other glass, and now all of a sudden it's turned into drinking vessels, or predominantly drinking vessels, beakers and such.
I want to take this thread to someone that I think you're really going to enjoy. It's your favourite topic. But first, I want to say, writing about the Picts has been so exciting, and it's paradigm shift in my head to think about people from the past and to admire them and to think of them as brilliant. I think a very Victorian and very Christian way of thinking, like traditional way of thinking about the past, is we're always moving forwards. We're always advancing on the next thing. When we talk about the Picts, talk about as archaeologists, like, God damn it, they didn't They didn't make buildings that stick around. They didn't leave things for us. But if you think about that in like a modern branding, well, they recycled. They were so efficient. They left no trace. They didn't need to do documents. They didn't need all of these huge like forms of waste that we do today. They don't have microplastics. They were here, had their fun, and left a couple standing stones and moved on. And in the scale of time, the standing stones will be dust. It's all smooth one ecology. Love that. Beautiful. Brilliant. And with their recycling culture, they have all of these beautiful, intricate, insane beads.
Yeah.
And I think with silver import, with glass import, I will hand over to Heather to talk about beads,
Yes.
but like they are reusing and repurposing so much stuff. We have a few clothing artifacts that are showing they're remade from multiple other pieces of clothing. Like, this is such sustainable ecology and economy. This is so good. This is something we should be aspiring to.
Yes. So I am a glass bead specialist for this period, so I'm happy to talk about beads. I will try to rein myself in because I could go for days. But yes, and when we talk about beads for the Picts, I have kind of taken a certain number of liberties, in part because glass beads that we find in this period are usually unstratified. We don't really generally know exactly when they're from. And so there are certain typologies. I mean, my PhD and master's did stuff with beads. So there are some typologies for Iron Age material, but there's no, for most of them, there's no clear evidence that they're from an Iron Age context. We just are associating them with Iron Age because the few that are from a secure context are dated to the Iron Age. But that doesn't, things can be, they can be around for a long time and they can be in use for a long time. So I am adding in some Iron Age beads into Carved in Stone because they're cool. So Aberdeenshire in particular, well, northwestern Scotland has a lot of really unique designs for glass beads. And one of them is what I tend to call a Triskelly bead. So it's a triangular bead. If you imagine a triangular bead with the points chopped off or flattened a bit, and then on the center of where each point was, there's a circle that then spirals into the middle, and they connect on one side of the perforation. So basically, they're a Triskelly that's been folded over a 3D bead. And those are brilliant. They're always a really dark sort of base color with yellow spirals. It's always a yellow spiral. And they're some people always say they're very similar to Irish and English examples. That is not true. There are significant differences. But what's really wonderful about them, number one, is that they're almost all made out of recycled glass. Even if they are Iron Age, they're still recycled glass. And I think limiting them to the Iron Age is a big if. But also, even though they're recycled glass, when you shine a torch through them, they light up in brilliant colours. Their base colour can be a deep blue, it can be a hot pink, even though it looks black without the torch behind it. It can be a deep green, a yellow, it can be whatever colour you want it to be, or whatever colour you think, there probably is one. And they're all unique. There aren't two of these that are identical to each other, so they're not being mass produced. But what's wonderful about this is that when you recycle glass, you have to be very careful about mixing the colours if you want to end up with something that isn't brown, basically. So what they're doing is they're looking at these bits of glass waste that they're then recycling into these beads, and they're separating them by color enough so that they still end up with such a vibrant deep blue or a vibrant green. And the other cool thing is that even though if you look at these beads without the torch behind them, it just looks like a dark background with a yellow spiral, they look very similar to each other. If you hold it up to sunlight or you hold it up to a candle, you can see the different colors. So they're intentionally making these beads with different specific background colors that they've made sure haven't mixed with another color of glass, which is so cool. And I think speaks to what Brian's saying about people being really, really smart. People have always been intelligent. They've been intelligent since humans became humans and probably long before. And people in the past were just as smart, just as stupid, just as annoying, just as funny as we are today. Another example of Scottish beads that could well be early medieval, we don't know, there are only 3 of them and none of them are secure context, are what I tend to call marbled beads. So we have beads that are a dark blue sort of core, translucent dark blue, that then have an opaque yellow marbled into them. And so the bead is blue, green, and yellow when you look at it. And there's another example that's blue, red, and purple. And then another example that's kind of, I think they were experimenting. It's kind of a clearish yellow glass with an opaque yellow. So it's not a tricolor bead, but it's in the same style. So it's clear that they're not only experimenting with different ways of making beads, there are no examples of these style of beads elsewhere in this period at this time in Europe, in the world, that I'm aware of. And I've asked many people. But they also understand how these colours interact with each other, and how when you layer a translucent glass over an opaque one, you get the mix of the two colours without mixing the glass itself. So you get these really clean lines of multicoloured beads. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that they're doing with beads there. And for those who have looked at, say, the penannular brooches or the various silver and gold metalwork that they're doing, for those who have looked at the stones, it's very clear that the Picts are very skilled at what they're doing. And obviously there are examples where it's clear that whoever made it is less skilled, perhaps maybe learning as they're doing, because who reaches that level of skill without practice? But there's so many examples of really, really skilled art and labour that the Picts are engaging in that hopefully helps to dispel sort of stereotypes about the past, and particularly about the medieval period, that people somehow didn't know things or weren't intelligent or weren't skilled at doing anything. And with trade, there's also hopefully dispelling the myth that they're somehow not connected to other groups of people, particularly international groups of people. We have quite a few sort of international travellers that arrive in Pickland within the book, and we have evidence for all of that. Not those people specifically, obviously they're made up characters, but all of it is couched in actual academic research. So
I think a fun, quick little example.
Just
We keep going. Yeah.
I know it's really hard because there's so much that is
So much,
really
yes.
interesting, and you can really get into it. But if it is a quick example, you can use it.
Oh no, it's a couple sentences. Don't worry. We have evidence of trade from North Africa and goods from North Africa coming through, and so we have someone from North Africa, from the Wagadu Empire, coming up and being like, "I've heard that you guys don't use any ceramic. This is insane. I need to see what it's about."
Yeah.
And that's just why they're there. They're just a traveller. And theoretically it's possible because the trade routes exist. Someone could easily come up, well, not easily because it's travelling across the world, but someone could come up and see Pickland. And it changes how people think about the past to know that you have all of Europe, you have Asia, you have the whole world coming to Scotland at this time period. It changes it from being like a little backwater to, feels like an international destination.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's wonderful. But I am running low on time.
No, that's fair.
So I, as concise as you could be, which I know is tricky. What one thing would you like people to know about the Picts? And what one thing, if you could travel back in time, would you ask a Pict?
Oh, that's a big one.
We know you're going to be concise. Let's go for what one thing would you like people to know?
I think, it's what I kind of just said, that the Picts are people just like we are. They're just as human as we are. They had just as human experiences. And them existing, a millennium plus ago doesn't make a difference in terms of how human they were. And they're a lot more than blue painted people on a battlefield. There's a lot more to them.
They're highly sophisticated.
Yes.
And what would you ask a Pict, assuming you could understand one another?
I honestly, I would be so curious. If I couldn't figure it out just by being there, I would be so curious about the writing system / whatever they're using in its place. We've gone with oral tradition because that seems the most logical answer from what we know. I would be so curious to talk to them about language and writing systems and especially because we have monastic, the Book of Deer, for example, is we've recently potentially found the monastery, maybe, so if we're writing books in Pickland but then not writing other things, what is going on with literacy in Pickland? I'd really love to to chat about them. But if I did get that chance, I'd have to take Catherine Forsyth and bring her with me, because she would be upset if I didn't.
Yeah.
In her postcards.
Yes.
Brian.
Written in Pictish.
Figure it out.
What was the first one?
So the first
What do I
one,
want people to know?
what do you want people to know?
I want to highlight that history is a cycle. We learn the same lessons over and over again, and what we learn about the past, we learn about ourselves. By engaging with history, we get to think about how we want the future to look and where we want to take ourselves. I think history is just fun in its own right, and I think everyone should just do it. Enjoy it, see it, dive through it. And if I could ask Picts about something, I think I just want to hang out with them. I think I just want to see the games they play and how they hang out with each other and how they fall in love and all the things like that. I like seeing that happen. I think it's so revolutionary to see yourself in the past and know that you exist in the past and know you've always existed. It's a sense of community across time. And I think I just want to hang out with them.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you both so much for your time and your expertise. It's been such a joy.
Carved in Stone will be out and published around November this year, 2025. And if you'd like to know more about it, I've included the links for you to follow. When I spoke to Professor Gordon Noble about Pictish trade, he, like Brian and Heather, mentioned cattle. And here's what he had to say.
You mentioned there it wasn't a coin-based society, so what do you believe that they were using as a currency, aside from silver and what we think of as kind of very monetary today?
Yeah, so it's things like food resources, render. So in this time period, the followers of a king are called his clients, which is quite an interesting word, yeah. And they give the king food renders as a way to support the royal household, but they also give things like labour. So they're building bridges or roadways or forts, which is quite interesting because forts are the way that these kings in northern Britain seem to really express their status and perhaps support their position within society. So in fact, if you're giving your labour to build the king's defences, I guess you're kind of helping the wider community defend themselves against your neighbours and your enemies, but you're also kind of bounding yourself in chains, literally, aren't you, in terms of you're maintaining the way that these kings stay in power. So it's really quite fascinating. But the other driver of the economy is the animal economy. So in early medieval Ireland, where we have better historical sources, including legal texts, cattle is literally equivalent to coins in terms of they have defined values. People's ranks are defined by how many cattle they own, and it's very likely to have been similar in Pictland in terms of the cattle economy seems to be a real driver. So at some of these major elite centres you find something like the animal bone assemblages might be 80% cattle, which probably wouldn't have been the same across the spectrum. It seems to be really concentrated in these elite centres, and it looks like cattle are being brought in again as kind of food render and means of exchange in these societies. So yeah,
I think the fact that the cattle is such an important part of their life from such an early date, it's so interesting. You see like cows, bulls reflected on the sculptured stones.
Yeah.
But also this importance of the cow carries on right the way through, even into 19th, 18th century. And there's so many stories about cows and milk and the importance of it, and so I find that thread that connects to such an ancient time absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And as you say, they do appear on the stones. So at Burghead we've got all these bull carvings. And elsewhere you have Fowlis Wester, for example, down in Angus. You've got this cross slab. And on the back you've got what look like warriors leading a procession. And in that procession is a whole bunch of cattle. And they have these amazing bells around their neck, one of which we found at Burghead in recent years. So it really brings it home how important things like cattle were to everyday life. And then you also have these upland settlements in Perthshire, these so-called Pitcairnmouth style houses named after the first site that was identified. And they're like long houses, and on one end clearly people were living, and the other end was your animals, your cattle. So people literally living cheek by jowl next to their cattle. So again, it just, I wouldn't swap my modern life for it again, but again, it kind of underlines the importance of the animal economy and the interlinkages between people and their animals in this time period.
Cows and cattle, as it's frequently mentioned in the podcast, were very important to the Picts. And if we're going to talk about cows and trading goods, then we also need to talk about leather and hides. So I grabbed my camera and microphone and headed to Perthshire to speak to Pictish leathercraft expert Hamish Lamley.
My name's Hamish Lamley. I'm a historical leatherworker with a business, Pictavia Leather, that focuses on all kind of aspects of Pictish culture.
And how did you get started in historical leather working?
Well, leatherworking kind of began, 15 years ago now. I was actually bedbound from back operations and needed something to kind of stay focused. So I kind of started picking up a craft, and leather just kind of spoke to me. And then I started in like bushcraft, outdoors leatherwork, and found my like passion for history kind of led me in that way. And then I found it more of a challenge as it went on. Like the more of the rabbit hole you go down, the more challenge you find, and the more like interest you find. And then you find when the details matter, there's so many to get right. So it's just a big kind of rabbit hole of geeking out over history, really. The most fun challenge is when you find an artifact that you like analyze in the museum, and you're going through this incredible craft that we're only trying to replicate, that the original craftsmen were the real masters. And whilst we're looking through all the details in these items, you spot mistakes. And so one of the biggest challenges is, do you follow the mistakes and make it accurate to the artifact, or do you fix the mistakes and make something entirely new, inspired by their artifact? So that's kind of a challenge, and it's kind of, sometimes it's nice to do one of each. You never really know where it's going to take you. Yeah.
And what was it specifically about the Picts that drew you in?
Well, I grew up in Aberdeenshire, so I used to play on the stones down at the Bass, which are like amazing stones, and they're in a glass case now, thankfully. But, you know, you can't grow up in Aberdeenshire without seeing Pictish culture. Stones and the schools and the old Archeolink Centre going to as a kid. So I think that encouraged it. And then after all my back operations, I went to live in Norway, and I was teaching Viking Age leatherwork to Vikings. And then it's kind of when you go, hang on, I've got my own culture to explore here. So coming back to Scotland led me deeper into that. And it's just always been that kind of drive to like rediscover my own culture and then kind of like share and educate with it as well.
That's fantastic. And I'd also really like to know more about your coracle that you've been making. Can you tell us a wee bit, how did you go from making things out of leather to making something quite large, like a coracle?
I went about it in a strange way. When I was in Norway, I was part of a project where we built a 40-foot long leather catamaran ship and sailed it around the fjords. So that was my introduction to leather boats. I was working on a farm, and the guy, Börje Muster, said, we need a leather worker. So I just turned up and like dropped my bag and started work. I had no idea what I was in for. And then he said, well, we need crew, so you're going to have to crew it because you know where all the faults are in the boat. So I started with that, and that was quite different. That was all tanned leather from modern tanneries and then tarred like a modern boat. So a lot of different characteristics to it. And then when I came back to Scotland and was looking into coracles, I have a friend who's an incredible coracle maker but makes them out of canvas. And then I have another friend who's kind of made one in Canada, and he's a tanner. So I got the three of us together and said, surely we can build these together. So we reached out to some museums, and we built some for the Scottish Cranach Centre and Whithorn Centre down Dumfries and Galloway, and just became obsessed with them. So the ones that we build is the Boyne Currach from Ireland. And a couple of years ago, I do a festival there where they have Viking ships on the Boyne. So I took my coracles, and whilst they're all out in their Viking ships doing the Viking thing, I just felt great doing a little pilgrimage, like having a little paddle down the Boyne past all the Viking ships, like a little local lad. And I think I love them most because it's an everyday man's boat. You can essentially build one in a day. If you're cutting corners and you need it quick, you can build it in a day. You can paddle away, and when you're done with it, you can discard it, or you can just store it, and they'll store for over a decade, no problem. They don't degrade like people think, and they're really easy to repair as well. And then the beauty is when you're actually on the water and you figure out what you can do with them. Yeah.
And how long does it take? You said you can do one in about a day,
Mhm.
but surely that doesn't involve the prep of the skin that you use as well, does it?
No, so we build them in more of like an artisan way, in that the skin needs prepped, so the skin needs taken off the beast and limed, and that takes 3 weeks in lime. What the lime does is turns the hide, the pH goes to alkali, that swells up, and then you can push all the hair follicles out. So that's removing all the hair, washing the hide down, and then you're left with just a really thick raw hide. But it's really, really thick at that stage, but it will come down a little bit. And then you've got to collect all the willow or hazel, and you've got to weave all the frame. That takes a solid day to do that. And then you kind of want a couple hours to do all the square lashing, and then putting the actual hide on the frame takes half a day. So you can reliably do the work in 2 days. It's just the prep on the hide takes the longest, unless you can get pre-prepped hides. But because we like to use cow skins, it's quite a lot of work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and they're heavy.
Yeah, no, they don't look like, they look fairly substantial. And the way that the hide is stretched over it reminds me of like drums, you know, like having to
Yeah,
stretch
that's all it is. It's just rawhide stretched over a frame. I've actually played this one like a Bowden. It works quite well when it's dried. And this one I have here is actually, the hide has been thinned by a tannery. So we used to do it ourselves all the time, and then we discovered this tannery we just sell as pre-limed hides. So we thought we'll just go with that and have them split down to make them a bit lighter.
And the first time that you got into one in the water,
Yeah.
one that you made yourself,
Yeah.
were you feeling confident?
There was no hesitation. It was myself and my friend Peter, the tanner. We had finished the lashings. We literally got the last lashing on, looked at each other, grabbed it, and just threw it in the water, and both dove in. And I'm a terrible swimmer, so there was just no way about it. And it was quite a big, like, 2-man one we built first. And yeah, we were just like in love with it. They were a lot of fun.
And do you paddle it like a canoe or?
No, that's the difference with them. So you paddle with like one paddle, like a canoe paddle, out front. And there's kind of different strokes you can do. Like a figure of 8 works really well, or like what we know as a J stroke with canoeing as well. It takes a while to get a hang of. I usually find people who have never paddled are better in a coracle, because there's no like habits to unlearn. You just teach them something new and they'll have a go at it.
I can well imagine Pictish folk doing that as well. Just like,
Yeah, they're playboats. That's what they feel like the little kayaks you get that are little play kayaks. When you get quite skilled in them, you can turn on a penny and you can just bob about really easily because they just sit nicely on the water. These ones are just for bobbing about, doing your fishing, getting from one side of the loch to the other, maybe small river journeys. You're not doing any great voyages in these, you know.
no, and they don't look.
You do get different shapes to coracles. You do get ones that have a bit more of like a prow on them, and then obviously you can just scale it up into much larger boats that we've got in Ireland and things. The old rumour is that priests were making it from Ireland to Iceland and America in these. I think if you send 10,000 priests out, one might get there. So technically it could be true, but I wouldn't want to risk it. I've actually been thinking about getting a few of us together and lashing them together with a sail, and maybe that would work. Having sort of 6 lashed together might work. It's a bit more stable. I mean, you could maybe cross to Ireland with that, no problem, but that would be my limit.
Now, if we talk a wee bit about the tools that you use, are they similar to the ones that you use with the coracle? The tools that you use, are they different?
Coracle, I just use a knife.
Just a knife.
That's all it really needs. When it comes to leatherwork tools, one of my most prized possessions is this box. This was the only replica ever made. It's now the first replica ever made because a friend saw it and had to have one as well. This was made by a good friend of mine in Norway. This is a replica of the Bursey box. It's in the National Museum of Scotland, and it's from Orkney, and we believe it was a leatherworker's toolbox. It's filled with tools where the iron's rotted away and the handles remain. So we can't fully tell what the iron was, but some of the bone tools are stamp and printing tools that I would definitely use in leather. And it's beautiful. Every single panel is carved with a different relief, all covered in spirals. So this is my kind of traditional toolbox. The one tool that doesn't fit in it is the head knife. So we have these from all sorts of cultures all throughout this time period. There was a much smaller kind of version found up at Tarbet, but that's more likely a hide scraping tool for actually tanning, with producing the vellum there. But on the smaller scale, it works as a head knife as well. And you do get head knives of that size, so it's probably a little bit both, much like the Ulu knife is used as both. So that's your main kind of cutting tool. Within here as well, I've just got various little things. I've got this is a replica 10th century tool from England, so not Pictish, but that's potentially a leatherworker's knife as well, which I just like to have in my toolkit. Then we've got various bone tools for moulding. This is for actually doing all the tooling detail. I make all these to do that. Various like scribing tools, which I just make as and when I need. This stamp is the stamp I made for recreating the Dundurn shoe. My replica is now in Perth Museum alongside the original. We've got sharpening stones from various slates. We've also got birch polypore that works as a strop. So this is all important to keep your tools sharp as well. Got various things like beeswax, and this is called code. This is more of a 13th century invention of resin mixed with wax for shoemaking, but I still like to use it in some of the older stuff. Thread winders, which are always useful. Various bits of cord for repairing things. Bone pins, which are replicas from various Crannig finds. Also work really good as styluses in leather. Little replica of the gaming piece from Dundurn Hillfort, my favourite site. Just like to keep it precious. One of my most renowned replicas I've ever made is this little mouse from Vindolanda Hillfort. So although it's Roman, I love the fact the leatherworker must have had a cat. I made a little mouse for it. So I that just gives me a giggle every time I go in here. And then the last one would be various just bone needles, just for stitching thread. They break very easily, so you've got to make quite a lot of them. But they also do the job. So that's really as simple as a toolkit as you need. There's a bone awl as well. You don't need much more than that to work with leather at all. The only other thing I would add would be these chisels which I made. And I can do pretty much everything with that. To the point that I've scaled back all the modern leatherwork methods and techniques I use. And I mostly use just the historical ones now with a lot of my work.
And do you find that there's a particular type of bone that works best for making these tools?
Not particularly. I mean, I use like red deer antler a lot for the tools. It's really tough. And just any kind of bone, it's all pretty strong stuff. So little leg bones like this work great. And they're just really easy to break and shape. So yeah, it doesn't really need much. And then thread-wise, I use linen, whereas they would have been using a lot of sinew back then. But we don't have any sinew makers these days, and I don't want to spend weeks making sinew. So yeah, there's little tips and tricks here and there we can use in modern stuff. But generally, this is kind of the tools that were found in the box, as well as things like I've got here, which is just awls for making holes. So this would have been more likely the iron and steel that's rusted away, and the handles were left more polished than this, but that's basically what we were left with. So we're kind of we don't have many leather finds when it comes to the picks. That's the problem. So we've got some of the leather finds, some of the kind of remnants of tools, and then we have to look at contemporary cultures as well and build up a lot of what we know from them. And most of that I go to Ireland, and then like Anglo-Saxon stuff, and some of the Vendel stuff in Sweden is very, very similar as well. But I try and stay away from any kind of Nordic sources as much as I can, because a lot of the Pictish stuff predates so much of that. So it's just nice to find different little links. In Ireland, it's so strong there. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, fantastic. And when you've seen all the different carvings and things that are on the Pictish stones, have you ever recognised any leatherworkers' tools or leatherwork? Anything like that? Anything that relates to your craft?
Sadly not. I really wish, because in later years the head knife becomes a symbol of the leatherworker, and you see it in medieval carvings all the time, all over the world. But during Pictish times, sadly not.
It's such a shame, because we know that cows were a massive part of their culture, their trade, and their everyday life. So yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah.
Leaving us not enough clues, as always.
Yeah, I mean, we do have at Iona, there is evidence of seal and otter leather. So I have an otter skin here, which was found dead, washed up at a loch, and I got a call saying we either bury it or you tan it. So, and it's a lovely skin. So we know they were definitely processing pelts like this as well, which is interesting. Which leads the question to were they eating them or not.
Yeah.
So it's nice that like leatherwork can also add into other crafts as well. So there's a lot that I've learned as a leatherworker, that how I fit into the cycle of craftsmen, and then you can take the modern application of that and apply it back to medieval times as well, or early medieval times, and you can find quite a lot that where you would have needed extra links, and so you can kind of find where those like missing gaps are, and it more like it leads us to an avenue where we should be exploring more. Not that there's anything there, but it means we can look for it.
So do you mean more like kind of cooperative working, or do you mean like going down the process? So like how would you envisage, for example, how a Pictish leather worker would be working in his workshop on a day-to-day basis? Is he tanning his own hide? Is he going somewhere else? What's he doing?
So I would say it still holds up today. You can be a tanner or a leather worker. It's hard to be both. I do both, but not to the best of my ability, because tanning is a full-time job. It's so much work. And to be very precise with it takes a lot of time and effort. So I tan a couple of hides a year and then do a lot of leather work with it. And I know tanners who do a little leather work, but mostly tanning. And I think a lot of craftsmen at the time, which is more evident in Irish sources, would be like craft workshops. Like a sword wouldn't be made by one person. You'd have teams of people doing all the different bits. And leather work would have been the same. And one of my favourite pieces is what I've dubbed the Cranach bag. I've got these ones hanging up here. So that's a full-size replica of the original from Glasgow. It's now in Kelvingrove. And what I love about this bag is it tells like a really good story of who was making it. Because what you can tell is the slits that are in the bag, every single one is identical. So they've not been cut, they've been punched. And what that means is somebody had to make the punch, because knives were prevalent, everyone was getting knives and you can trade them. But they probably had a blacksmith on hand to make the different punches of different sizes that they needed. You can also make punches out of antler, but they disintegrate very quickly and you probably see more ragged edges. So I love that the leatherworker on site was making these hides from one skin, because they'd take one entire red deer skin, and he didn't have a sinew maker, so he was punching holes and lacing the whole bag with leather. So that shows there was a chink in the chain there. But if the bag was heavily waxed, then they probably had a beekeeper, because leather workers need wax, so they need a beekeeper, they need a blacksmith, they need a sinew maker. So you kind of have to work with what you've got. And so when I look at items, I see what's in the item and then I try and look for what's missing. And that's usually the telltale sign of like where the links were going. So it's quite nice to see. And we've switched our industry now with tanning and leatherwork as well. So traditionally, tanners would tan different hides. And like I do here, like these hides, these are bark tanned. And different barks give you different properties. So a tanner would have all these different hides, tanning them with different barks. And the leather worker would say, I need a heavy, robust hide that's making a bag. It's got to be really waterproof, really resilient. So like that big bag there, they'd say, well, I have some lovely oak tanned hide. It's very waterproof and durable. And if you need some soft stuff, I've got some willow tanned leather. Now, modern tanneries tan everything with mimosa, which is a really good tanning agent from the Middle East. But it's not native to here, and it doesn't colour the leathers, and that means they can sell you a range of chemical dyes. So now the leather worker just buys in quite plain leather and dyes it all themselves, and there's like break in the cycle. So it's much better to go back to the tanning process. And doing historical replications, I can only make them if I tan the hides myself or get them from a tanner that I trust, because modern leather, you can't make these things at all. It just doesn't work. Even this pouch, it's not from Pictish era, this sporran. It's actually a 18th century Jacobean sporran I make based on one in the National Museum, and we have to tan 4 different hides in 4 different ways just to produce this. So you really need to know the difference between your tanning properties and your leathers and everything. You have to go right into it, and it's the only way it performs like the original. I've tried making it out of other leathers and it just doesn't look the same, it doesn't work. So it's going down these little avenues of the tools and the leathers and the treatments and the chemistry into it, and thinking what they had available, because they had every tool in our toolbox except a screwdriver because they didn't need it. It's all there.
And even the punch actually looks very similar to a screwdriver. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. It's interesting to think about these crafts in a much more holistic way. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, because it changes with barks. It changes by what you have around you. And so you do get like seasonal things, and then you do get real location based. So all you need is a trader to come in with a wagon full of bark from somewhere else, and you've got a whole new product to impress everybody with. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting to think about. You might actually be able to trade in bark as well.
Yeah.
Because I've been talking to people about trading in cows
Yeah.
or other goods. But, yeah,
Well, the
trade
bark would have been a waste product from the timber trade, because they still had a timber trade, building any kind of ships or logs. The bark's all scraped off, that's kept for the tanners. The tanners are then tanning the hides, and all the hair they take off, that goes to the builders, and that gets put into lime render into the buildings. And it still was until about 100 years ago, when they stopped. So they started importing human hair from China. And then when they couldn't do that, they now just fill it with fiberglass. So whenever I are working hides, I give all the hair to a builder friend of mine. It just makes better lime render. So again, we've got all these cycles that you don't even sometimes see as traditional craft, but it all connects through all the different crafts.
Yeah. I know. I think it's fascinating. When you've been working with leather and you've been working with these tools, and looking at it from a historical perspective, is there anything that has surprised you the most about what the Picts were doing or how something works?
It's difficult. I think it's more the fact that it does just work. And it's not that... it's not to find a way in that it works for us. It's to find a way that we understand how it works at the time. That's what I found is most important. Because shoes are a big one. I get asked all the time, how do you keep your feet dry in these shoes? Well, the answer is you don't. A lot of shoes at the time, you had to soak to put them on. So you naturally have wet feet anyway. And so what we do is we often spend weeks in the Highlands trialing all the stuff we make. It's got to be stress tested. And if it's not working, then we're either using or making it wrong, or we're just not understanding how it's made. And that all these natural things can also be repaired very easily. They need to be maintained and repaired. And that's the mindset that I find important for trying to approach historical craft from a modern mindset, that we have to change. We don't have to bring this stuff up to our era. We have to go back. A big one is sheepskins, doing a lot of tanning workshops and trying to teach people how to look after skins, that you have to air them and not let moisture get to them. People don't know how to do that anymore because they buy chrome tan skins from IKEA that they don't care or think about. So some people say, I've got a little patch of mould. So I have to say, well, are you airing it every week? Are you treating it? Are you getting it under the sun? And are you maintaining it properly? Have you waxed your boots lately? It's, all these little things. And I think when it comes to any kind of like historical craft of any era, it's just putting yourself into that mindset of like not only how they were making it, but how were they maintaining it? And then when it breaks, how were they repairing it? Because that's the problem-solving mindset that they had every day that I think we have started to lose and are trying to reclaim.
I would like to ask you about salmon leather, because that's something that always intrigues me, is that we did use a fair bit of fish leather, salmon leather. Have you made anything from fish leather, salmon leather?
So I have more in the house, but here's some salmon leather into this pouch as well. And yeah, it really intrigues me because it's survived most in Scandinavia, most northern kind of traditional cultures. I can't see why the Picts wouldn't have had this. It's the thing, when we look at cow skins, to tan cow skin can take 2 years, especially with natural processes. To tan a deer skin can take 3 to 6 months. To tan fish skin takes 3 days. It's the most readily catchable animal, it's the most easily processed material, and it makes a really strong material. It's just in small pieces, so you have to get creative with it. And that's why we mostly see it in clothing, in like Greenland, Inuit and Sami stuff. It's always in hats or hems or little pouches. So it's really strong, and it's a joy to work with. And you can do a lot with it. So yeah, sadly we have no evidence of it, but I'd love to think they were working it. So whenever I incorporate into things, I always just say, there's no evidence, but it's a potential there. But it has to be a theory at this stage.
So last couple of questions. What would you most like people to know about the Picts?
I think just that they were a highly sophisticated culture. We can see their hairstyles and their clothing and all the stone carvings. And when you look at the craft, we can't replicate half of this today. We just can't. So I like to know that it's a culture that stands up to all the contemporary cultures of the time. It was important and it was powerful. It was a really beautiful culture with language, location, and all the cultural crafts we've got. So more than anything, I just like to show that and say I'm trying to do my best to just copy a little essence of that.
And then the final question, if you could travel back in time and you can ask a contemporary craftsman picked anything, and assuming that you could understand each other, what would you ask them?
Well, that is difficult. Like, to speak to a craftsman to ask who they'd like to craft for the most. Because I'd like to understand the social economic value of a craftsman of the time. There's ranking systems for metal workers. I have no idea where a leather worker fits in. I'm probably close to peasant at this stage. So I'd quite like to know where leather workers fit in and what their aspirations are of who they want buying their work. Because I get asked that quite a lot and I never have an answer for it. Back then, are they trying to make work for local lords or do they want to travel? Because we think craftsmen travelled. Specifically between Pictland and Ireland, it's documented with silver work. So I'd like to know what the real aspirations of a Pictish leatherworker would have been, or if it's purely just to craft enough to survive and not die. That's also valid, especially in this day and age. But I think that's what I'd like to know, because I think that's something I could connect with them the most, of who are we making this for? Because I'm making it for fellow nerds who want to look at something and go, oh, this is as close to Pictish as I can get. Who are they making their stuff for? Or is it just purely for the enjoyment of it whilst they're trying to make a living?
Well, thank you so much, Hamish, for your time and your knowledge and for demonstrating your skills.
Thank you.
Special thanks to all our guests for sharing their time, skills and expertise with us. Thanks to Groom House Museum for letting us explore their collections. Huge thanks to Debbie R. Moore for the wonderful sound design, and of course, special thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund for their support in making this series possible.